Raising the Bets is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to Raising the Bets. We're a Catholic couple raising 5 kids outside of Boston. Join us as we share the joys and challenges of marriage, homeschool, and our adventures near and far as we make sense of the world and experience the best parts of our culture. I'm Dom Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
So it's been a busy week this week, Melanie. We've
Very busy.
Talking about that. So let's get right into what's been going on. First, we had some sad news. You longtime listeners will know that one of the things we like to do in the spring through fall is go to farmers market. There's a particular farmers market in our area that we go to on Saturdays. And we've been doing that since 2009.
2009, probably, yeah.
Yeah, the spring after we moved here. So 14 years. And, we've gotten to know the vendors. There's been some changes over the years. You know who I didn't see was this week when I went, it was Tom, the fish guy. And hopefully they'll be back. But the vendors change over the years. Some have been there forever, but the others, they come and go. But they've been there many of them have been there for a long time. So there was this one particular vendor, this guy who only showed up in the fall when his produce was ready, Jerry, who sold Asian pears.
That's
it. He just grew Asian pears. He had an orchard, and that was his passion, was growing Asian pears, various kinds. And over the years, he's been so kind to us.
Very, very kind.
I mean, we'd show up and we'd have 5 kids in tow, and we'd tell them about how much the kids loved the pears. And he would, sometimes give us extra ones that were like bruised or whatever,
And frequently he had samples out. He would cut them up and hand them around and have everybody taste them and tell them which ones they liked best.
And he knows we're gonna buy the pears and we all like them. He's just being kind and sharing the pears and sharing his passion. So we didn't see him last fall though, and I was wondering about that. Why he didn't? We didn't go every week. It's gotten to the point where we just can't make it like we used to. Like we used to go every week, every Saturday from May to November. We were there, but it's gotten to the point where we just we make it a couple times a month at best, just with the different things going on. And so we didn't see him. And then the market sends out an email, the week before telling you who's going to be there, what's going on. And they had the announcement that Jerry had died. Jerry had passed away. And it was very sad. I was moved, maybe because I've had a few losses, my dad and my mom within the past 8 months. So, it kind of hits home a little bit to have more loss. I mean, we weren't close, or anything, but he was just someone I knew. And he was such a kind person. So, if you get a chance, remember in your prayers, say a prayer for the repose of the soul of Jerry and the consolation of his family. His wife, I think her name was either Maggie or Madge. That she's kind as well. So you can remember them. In any case, we had it was the third week of the farmers market, but the first one that I could make it to. You didn't make it. You and Bella stayed behind, but I took the other kids, the other 4,
right,
and got to the market. I had to get there early because I had recordings with Jimmy, so I had to get back. And so we had so I went and we did a quick run through, and I went to the produce farm, Aeonian, and picked up, I love spring radishes, the big, meaty spring radishes that are so huge compared to the supermarket ones. And what else I get? The strawberries, like fresh, in-season strawberries are just so good. Then, and I also got from them some chard and some cilantro and some spring greens for salad. So that'll be good. And then we went over to the bakery, Pain d'Avignon, where Cecilia, who's so nice. She's always so
great.
Kind. She's really sweet. And was like, she kind of was stood there staring at the kids for a second, like, why are they so big? And like there's this line forming behind us. She's like, oh my goodness, I'm just staring at your children. Let me go get your things. We got a baguette and some sliced sourdough bread. But yeah, that was good.
She's known the kids since they were little.
Bella was 3 when we first started going, you know.
I don't think she was there the first couple of years, but
no. She came in a few years in. There was another lady who was there. Remember the lady who was like, she was like the extra in a movie or something? Remember that? She was in one of the Ben Affleck or Matt Damon movies or a Wahlberg movie or something.
Right. Yeah.
It was, yes, something like that. But she was in it. I think Patriots Day. I think
maybe.
No, it was a comedy. It was the Mark Wahlberg movie with Will Ferrell, Daddy something or other, where they're like the two the divorced dad and the second dad, you know, then the remarriage dad. I haven't seen it myself, but I gather she was actually in that with a speaking part, which was kind of funny. Anyway, that's a far afield. Then I went over to Summer's Bounty, got our jams. Those ladies have been there from the beginning.
Yep.
And you know, strawberry jam, raspberry jam, blueberry jam is my favorite. I love blueberry jam. Got some cookies from Steel and Rye, spelt chocolate chip cookies. Those were.
I probably could have eaten one of those then.
Oh, I suppose. Well, they might have had regular flour in it too. But
oh, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm going wheat free currently because I've been having lots of rashes, and my doctor thinks that it's probably a wheat intolerance that I've developed. So,
well, the fact that Lucy had a wheat allergy for a long time is probably not a coincidence.
Yeah, I think that maybe I got sensitized to it by not eating wheat for a few years and then going back to it. I think my body just sort of said, "What is this? It's a foreign substance. I don't want it."
Right.
I don't know.
So
I don't love this.
So the only other thing I picked up some pork belly from Coppicat Farms, which I used in Saturday night's dinner, which I'll mention in a few minutes. So that was nice to get there. I didn't see Mark, the market manager. He wasn't there, or the other lady that we always see. They weren't there. So hopefully we'll see them next time. So the other thing that was Saturday. So going backwards in time to Thursday. Which was for us Ascension Thursday, because we live in one of the dioceses where that's on the feast day. We went to Mass in the midday, but it was Isabella's birthday, and our new tradition is one parent and the birthday child go out to dinner because we can no longer afford to take everyone out to dinner. And so you could talk about where you guys went, because she picked you. She picked you instead of me, obviously.
Isabella wanted seafood, and so we went to our favorite seafood place, Jake's, where we usually go at least once a summer. It's in Hingham. It's in Hull.
It's in Hull,
rather.
Yeah.
It's right on the water. Like literally, the dining room looks out over the
bay.
The bay.
Yeah.
And she had fried clams and clam chowder.
That's my
favorites. And I had poke tuna. Which is raw tuna seasoned with soy and sesame and scallions, and then I had a green salad to go with it. It was an appetizer, but it was plenty of food for a meal. And we sat and watched the gulls, fishing on the mud flats, pulling up clams and crabs and flying off to go drop them somewhere and crack them open. And we watched the tide come in. It was really lovely. Lovely dinner, and we sat and chatted, and she is 17 years old this year and just a beautiful young lady. It's kind of stunning to me that she's 17.
Well, and she's an adult now, and she talks like an adult, and you know, and it interacts, and you have to, it's a parent thing where you have to start thinking of your child as not one of the little kids, but as an adult, and expecting that they will. You can't get away with as much. You just can't. So
wait, she can't or we can't?
We can't get away with as much because she's on the ball. She's an adult. She understands more than a little kid does. So it's kind of funny. She has started to call me on things. That is a strange feeling.
Uh-huh.
Yep. So, but she's not so grown up that I can't give her Legos and Star Wars action figures for her birthday. But she also got, a cool hat and hair chalk, which is a thing that I never knew about until now.
Yeah, and cool clothes and
yep.
Yeah, books, of course.
And books, of course. So that was Thursday. So on Friday was a terrible event. This was the worst thing that happened all week to me. I went food shopping, and afterwards I took the girls to Dunkin' Donuts for a coffee, and I got given the senior citizen discount. I can't tell you how awful this moment is for me. Yeah, it was quite shocking. The funny thing is the lady who gave me the discount was like, she was at least 10 years older than I am. Like, clearly old. She wasn't like this young kid who says, "Oh, who's this grandpa? He needs a discount." No, it's this lady who was older than me giving me the discount.
She thought she was doing you a favor, probably.
I guess. According to my brother Bernie, who's an expert in all things Dunkin', he says you have to be 62 to get the discount.
You are not 62.
And I am well short of that by most of a decade. So, yeah. It was funny. So then today was, we had a family party at my brother's house. There were several graduations in the family this weekend. My nephew, Josh, graduated high school. My niece, Kateri, graduated college. And my brother John's, and those are my sister Evelyn's kids. My brother John's son, Dominic, he graduated college and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. And if you're keeping score, that's two of his sons who are now armed officers in the U.S. Army, which is pretty impressive. Their other son, John Paul, is actually deployed in Romania at the moment. But Dominic is graduated. He already has a job with Fidelity, and he's going to be in the National Guard instead of active duty. And so it was a great party. It's always fun to have these parties, to get together with people, see family, see friends. My nephew, Dominic's brother, Peter, his oldest brother, was there, and we always talk about, something to do with gaming, like video games, something to do with Hollywood, because he's a writer, and he wants to write. I've mentioned before how he's writing TV shows and movies, and then this time we talked about Irish whiskey, because that's his latest thing. He's 30, he's single, he's got a lot of disposable income, and so he enjoys life. So he has the ability to do things like buy expensive bottles of whiskey and go on trips and buy massive Lego sets and that sort of thing. And it's fun to talk to him about what his latest thing he's doing. It's fun. So we had a lot of whiskey talk at this one. So I learned a bit about Irish whiskey. He's apparently he's only Irish whiskey, not Scotch whiskey. Like he's focused on Irish whiskey. So anything else at the party that kind of stands out?
No, it was
just the usual fun, beautiful weather. We couldn't have asked, but we always say, like, my brother's has parties. No matter what the forecast is, it's always a beautiful day. I think there may have been once ever that they had a party, and they have several a year, where it rained. Otherwise, it's beautiful, sunny, warm. So it's kind of funny. So that's what we've been doing. So let's talk about some food. On Friday, they had mahi-mahi on sale at the supermarket. So I bought some so we could try it out and make some new recipe with it. Now, mahi-mahi used to have a different name.
Dolphin fish.
Dolphin fish, that's right. But
that didn't fly very well with the whole, because people got confused and thought that it was actually dolphin.
Yeah.
And
that kind of hurt the sales. Dolphin fish is not actually like the cute little mammal that performs at SeaWorld. No,
it's a fish.
It's a fish. I don't know why maybe because dolphins ate it or something, or it was found near dolphin schools or something.
No idea.
Anyway, so they changed its name to mahi-mahi to make it exotic and Hawaiian and that sort of thing. And
that probably is an actual Hawaiian name for it. But.
Yeah. Anyway, it came in this very long fillet, which was frozen. I mean, that fillet had to be, what, 3 feet long?
Something like that.
Yeah. 3 pounds. And it was a very simple recipe. It was the recipe called it easy mahi mahi recipe with lemon garlic sauce. It was basically a piccata sauce, which is lemon, capers, garlic, butter, olive oil, that sort of thing. You did the cooking on that.
I did.
How'd that go?
It was okay. I also cooked coconut rice and some zucchini with tomatoes and green beans. The fish itself was like just sear it in the pan.
I mean, it was easy
with a quick garlic sauce.
Yeah, I mean that's what the recipe says, easy, right? So
it was easy.
Yeah.
The flavor was good.
It was okay.
It wasn't the best ever, but it was good.
Yeah. Wasn't universally pop. I mean, the kids are just so used to, like, most of them prefer salmon. Anthony doesn't like salmon, so we usually get him a whitefish anyway when we have.
Mahi isn't exactly a white fish, though. It's got more flavor. It's more akin to tuna, I would say, than to like,
or even like swordfish in some ways.
Yeah,
because it's got that like dark part too. Right. Like a tuna has like a dark meat, and a white meat section. Yep. If you want to put it that way. But it was okay. It was it was good. I mean, would we have it again? I mean, I might pump up the lemon a little bit on that, which is a common refrain.
I put 2 lemons worth of lemon juice in it.
Really? Yeah. I felt like it needed something, but I'm not sure what. But it felt like there was something missing in it. Maybe wine?
Wine would probably have been a good addition to the sauce. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a link to the recipe in the show notes, but yeah, maybe think about something like that, adding a little wine or a little, I think what else, vinegar, like some kind of, not balsamic, but maybe like a champagne vinegar or a wine vinegar or something.
Perhaps.
Yeah. A white wine vinegar, but something like that. So we made that. Another thing I made was for last night's dinner, that pork belly. I was making the okonomiyaki. Now we've mentioned that a few times. We made okonomiyaki like a year ago that you made, and then,
it was much more than a year ago.
Was it really?
Oh okay. Yeah, it was a couple of years ago.
Okay, and then well, I mentioned last week when I was camping, one of the scoutmaster, who's Japanese, she made okonomiyaki, and it kind of got the bug in me. I'm like, oh, I want to try it. Because she showed me, like, look, if you just buy the mix, it's in a package, you get these things, it's really easy. I'm like, oh, she's like, this is the lazy mom recipe. When mom wants to be lazy and she just makes okonomiyaki. And I'm like, after I made it, I'm like, this is not lazy. Lazy is opening up, and which we've done, but like doing it easy is opening a box of mac and cheese and cooking that. This still has a few steps in it. But I did it, and you shred up a head of cabbage, and you mix up the water, the powder, the flour powder and eggs, and then you put it in a pan. And then I sliced up the pork belly and laid strips of that across the top. You cook it for 3 minutes on one side, you flip it over, and you cook it for 4 minutes on that side. And I did what she did, which is I put a lid on it, which to steam it a bit. And that worked out pretty good. In fact, I got kind of a assembly line method going where I was prepping the next batch while the first batch was cooking and that sort of thing. It was okay. I had some sauces, the okonomiyaki sauce, the Japanese mayo, the nori powder, which is like the nori seaweed powdered, and the katsuboshi, which is the bonito flakes, the tuna flakes.
The okonomiyaki sauce is sort of a sweet barbecue sauce.
Yes. And the mayo is a sweet mayonnaise too, the Kewpie mayonnaise. So I mean, I kind of liked it. I liked with the pork belly, which was a sort of a a meaty flavor. So pork belly is just like uncured bacon. I mean, that's all it is. You could do it with bacon. Bacon be even easier. I happen to see the pork belly at the market. I'm like, oh, I want to try that. So I was gonna use bacon for that, but it worked out pretty good. But it is easy. I mean, it's not hard at all. It's a pretty easy recipe, and if you just follow the instructions on the package, so maybe what I'll do is I'll link to the package on Amazon, and the package itself is small, but it's like it can make like 14 or 15 pancakes, like servings. So it's like it makes plenty. So you're not going to go through it all in one meal. So that's the okonomiyaki. And then you made potato salad to bring today, your usual potato salad.
German potato salad.
German potato salad.
So this has a sort of bacon fat dressing. So you boil your potatoes with your red potatoes, and you get the little ones, and you like just slice them in half or quarters, like bite-sized chunks. And then you cook the bacon. You cook some onions in the bacon grease, and then you add your vinegar and mustard to the onions and the bacon grease. And so that makes your dressing for the potato salad. And you use like a nice whole grain mustard to give it a lot of good texture. This time I added some sun-dried tomatoes as well. And you toss the bacon in at the end. Really, really good. I love the flavors. It's a mustard and vinegar. There's no mayo in it. And what I realized this time, and I've made this recipe a few times, is that it calls for a cup of vinegar. And last time I made it, it took forever to like cook down until it was a reasonably not super watery sauce. This time I actually read the instructions more carefully and realized that you were supposed to put half a cup of the vinegar in the potatoes as they boil. So they kind of absorb some of that vinegar flavor as they're cooking. And then only half of the cup of the vinegar is in the dressing. This made a huge difference.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. So anyway, lesson learned, read the instructions more carefully. I have a tendency to just skim because I sort of know what I'm doing, and evidently that's a mistake.
Yes. Yeah, that can be a mistake. So that's what we've been cooking. Let's move on to things we've been reading. And well, this week, let's talk about this, just things we're reading. We watched a few things, but nothing notably
nothing to write home about.
Nothing to write home about. Like just continuations of series that we're watching. But so I finished another novel. This one was the 5th Murderbot story called Network Effect. And Murderbot Diaries is a series that takes place in the distant future, and it follows this security robot that is a cyborg. It's part human, part artificial machine, part human. And it started thinking independently. It went rogue, quote unquote, but rogue in a sort of, I don't want to be around other people way at times. And so I mentioned it before. This one, it was the longest story yet. Like all the previous stories were novellas, and this was a full-length novel, and it was good. It wasn't as, sometimes the stories have been a bit complex, like trying to keep track of things. I didn't feel like I lost track of anything in this one. I liked some of the new characters that were added, especially the teenager that he has to deal with, who feels like a teenager. I'm guessing the author, Mary Wells, has a teenager in her life. But she feels like a teenager in the sense of, at times she's annoying child, defiant, but other times she's sort of this incipient adult, like we're just saying with Bella, Right. And so interesting there.
As a parent of teens, you felt like it was well done.
Yes. And then just how this basically like autistic robot. I mean, that's what he is. It's an autistic cyborg. He's autistic in the sense of, or on the spectrum in the sense of, that's how if you wanted to compare it to human behavior, someone who's on the spectrum, maybe fairly far on the spectrum, with social difficulties, that's how it reacts with people.
I think it's interesting that so Murderbot, the books are written in the first person, written by Murderbot. And so it uses a first person pronoun I, and most people refer to Murderbot using it.
Yeah.
So there's no gender assigned. It's a construct. You read it as he.
Yeah.
I actually tend more towards she.
Really?
Yeah. Like it did not strike me as obviously a he.
That is interesting. Well, I guess. I mean, I just picture, a security unit. I mean, maybe that's my own misogyny, I suppose. But
misogyny. I just think it's interesting that when you strip out from a character any gender, and you just let the reader sort of impose their own perceptions. I think that I wonder how many readers would tend to just go with their own gender as opposed to.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, because literally, it has flesh parts, but it's mostly machine. It does have a few brain parts, like a brain stem, like a human brain stem, and some other cloned organs, but it literally has no reproductive organs.
Right.
There's no nothing like that. So this, I mean, the cells would have to have an extra, wait, it might not even have any sex cells in it that have an XY differentiation.
Right. It might not actually have in fact, that comes up several times. It's I do not.
Well, it thinks people are icky and people's habits are icky too.
Right.
That's interesting. Well, that would mean that would make the interactions with another AI element in the story interesting too, because I mean, it's kind of an interesting question to see. It's what you're seeing is this creature emerging from this one very confined state of being to being a more fully realized person in itself.
Right.
And that's an interesting question. In reality, Data's a toaster. Are these, these constructs are not people, they are constructs. But Murderbot is not just a machine. It has a human brainstem, that was cloned from a person. So is this a person? Is it a cyborg in the sense of a person with mechanical parts? I don't think the author is at all interested in that question, but I certainly think about it as I read.
I think the author is actually interested in the question of personhood. I don't think the author is interested in sort of a real world, can machines be human? I think from the author's point of view, I think she views it as this is a machine with some flesh parts that some of the mechanical parts just happen to be made of flesh. I don't think she views it as a cyborg. The author does, where it's a human with augmented parts. I think she looks at the fact that a computer AI can be a person with no human parts. Right. I mean, I think it's deliberately ambiguous, but what you're saying is that from your perspective,
from my perspective, the fact that Murderbot has a brainstem and brain parts, that makes it more a person.
Right. Whereas for her, I think that there's a strong thread of there is a strong thread, especially in the most recent book, about all robots that are artificial intelligences are persons.
All the AIs are persons, whether they have
human parts or not,
biological human parts or not. Yes, that would be the authors. I think that's from my point of view. Anyway, it was good. It continues to be a really good series of books. I look forward to reading the next one. I'm kind of stuck because there's a new book coming out on the 23rd, which is the day that this episode drops. So I kind of started another book and I'm like, I don't really, it turns out this book I started is sort of in the middle of a series.
Oh, I hate that.
It's kind of, it's not really in the middle of the series. There was a whole series that came before, and this is like a new series in the same world, but it keeps referring to stuff that already happened. And I'm like, I don't, that's unsatisfying to me. Now I want to go back and read the first series so that I can
see. I think that even if it's a new series, quote unquote, it's still the same series. I mean, it's still a series,
right?
Part of a series.
It's all this stuff is referring to people, places, and events that have been written about in the previous books, and it's confusing. So, and this is sort of a space opera. So every chapter is a whole different set of people. It's like very strange, and so it's like. It's very complex. So I'm going to go back and maybe pick up the next Murderbot novella while I'm waiting for the other book to show up on Tuesday. So you found a new book that you really enjoy.
Yes, I would say it's one of my new top favorite books ever.
That's a high endorsement.
Yeah. So not surprising because another book by this author is also one of my favorite books. But this book was The Scent of Water by Elizabeth Gouge. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name.
Goudge.
Anyway, she was born at the turn of the last century. So in about 1890s or something, around 1900. And she was the daughter of an Anglican minister, and she traveled extensively in her childhood. And her novels, they're not autobiographical, but they kind of are all over the place, geographically speaking. But The Scent of Water is about a woman who is a Londoner, born and bred, lived in London all her life, who inherits a house in the country from a cousin with whom she shared a name, but she only met this cousin once when she was a small child. She was her dad's cousin, and her dad died shortly after she'd met this cousin and wasn't able to take her to visit her again. And it's really about not just this woman, but about the community. So as she lives in this cousin's house, she starts to kind of get to know her cousin and probes into who was this woman. And she also gets to know all of the neighbors, the community in this small English village. There are no murders.
That was my first question. So who dies?
No murders, but there's a birth, and somebody goes to jail for some sort of economic business wrongdoing, defrauding people, I think, speculating with other people's money, something like that. It's really just a lovely novel about a community rather than a person. And so there's a blind man who was blinded in the Second World War. Takes place maybe in the 50s, 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So the Second World War is not that long ago. And he was blinded in the war, and he's an author who basically composes in his head and dictates his poems and plays and books, who's kind of estranged from his wife. There's the vicar and his sister who's kind of mentally ill. There's the squire and his wife. There's a couple with kids. The kids want to play in the garden of the cottage and are mad at her initially for moving in and taking over their garden. But then what you find out as the story goes on is that her house is right next to the church. And it turns out that this church is the church of an old Cistercian abbey, which was, of course, taken over and destroyed by Henry VIII when he closed all the monasteries.
Mm-hmm.
And the church is all that's left of the abbey. But it turns out that all the houses in the village are sort of within the abbey grounds. And there's this sense in which it's almost haunted by this supernatural presence of the abbey itself. as this almost a spirit of a place. And there's like the spirit of this monk who they kind of almost encounter him. Various characters, they kind of imagine they see him or he appears to them in a dream. Sometimes there's a couple characters who hear chanting as if like they are able to hear the monks at prayer. And there's these moments of grace where the characters' lives are touched by something outside themselves and take a turn for the better. They're healed of ailments, like spiritual ailments, really. And it's just a really beautiful novel about community, communion, grace, and healing. And this beautiful relationships between like this older retired woman and the children. She strikes up a really beautiful friendship with the little girl next door, and she even takes on a tutoring role for her. And there's like one scene, especially, I love it when books get confession and reconciliation correct. There's just something really magical about seeing characters who confess a sin and then are reconciled. And so the little girl has taken something from the house like before the protagonist moved in, and she eventually comes to the point where she confesses it. And there's this beautiful moment of grace there. And I love it when an author can capture that grace of what reconciliation means to the soul in a way that really opens up the spiritual reality. And it was just, wow, one of those novels that really was so beautiful, so filled with birds and plants and flowers and the seasons of the year. And then this gorgeous imagery of water, which is clearly a baptismal imagery, and this grace that moves through the lives of these characters, and the living touch of history, how those who are dead aren't really gone. They continue to touch our lives, act in our lives, and we aren't separated as much as we think by time. There's also some really beautiful references to T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, which always wins, since that's my favorite poetry sequence ever. Anyway, I highly recommend it. This is the second Elizabeth Gouge book I've read. I also absolutely loved her novel, Green Dolphin Street.
So this was published in 1963.
Okay.
And she won an award for the Carnegie Medal for a book called The Little White Horse, which was a children's book.
Oh, I have read that. Actually. I've read two of her children's books, and I have to say, I didn't really like her children's books.
So J.K. Rowling says that Little White Horse is one of her favorite books and was a direct influence on Harry Potter.
I have to say, I think I didn't come to her children's books until I was an adult, and I think I was too old. Bella, I think, really liked The Little White Horse a lot. I felt like it just missed the mark for me. Somehow, I think, I don't know. Because there are children's books that I've read as an adult that I really loved, and these just kind of felt like a little flat. But I love her adult books, so.
She's got a whole bunch of them. She's got like 20 adult novels and probably 8 or 10 children's books, and then some anthologies and nonfiction she wrote as well. Interesting. She's got a book called God So Loved the World, The Story of Jesus, St. Francis of Assisi, A Diary of Prayer, and then her autobiography.
Right. I mean, I really feel like reading the two novels that I've read, that she really has a deep spirituality, and she manages to convey that, not in a preachy way at all, but just through story. There is no preachiness. It's just a really beautiful,
contrived Christian elements.
Yeah, it didn't feel contrived at all. And she didn't like necessarily, not every character had an amazing turnaround.
Was there something called the Romantic movement in the 1960s in British literature?
I don't know.
Because she was a founding member of the Romantic Novelists Association. It's not romance novels, but as she puts it, as the world becomes increasingly ugly, callous, and materialistic, it needs to be reminded that the old fairy stories are rooted in truth, that imagination is of value, that happy endings do in fact occur, and that the blue spring mist that makes an ugly street look beautiful is just as real a thing as the street itself. finding beauty in a world that's increasingly full.
Right.
Of
I mean, that was
ugliness.
definitely a theme in this novel, is sort of one of the reasons why the protagonist wants to move to the countryside is this aching awareness that this rural English life is disappearing, and it will soon be gone. And she wants to experience it before it's gone. There's one character who's a traditional craftsman, and he is the last practitioner of his craft, and he hasn't been able to hand it on to anyone else. And when he dies, this craft will die out with him. And there's that sense of the fleetingness, the encroaching of modernity.
That crosses cultures. Do you remember a few years ago there was this trend on Facebook, or these videos that just kept popping up of this Japanese, I think it was a Japanese woman, and the videos were all in Japanese with Japanese subtitles.
I think you're the one, if I'm remembering right, it was a Chinese woman.
Was it Chinese? Okay.
She's like made paper, and she was cooking, and
I guess, yeah. I think there was one in Japan too. I mean, I'm not doing the whole, it's all Asian and I'm mistaking them. I think I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with Japanese cultures, but anyway, in any case, but she was doing all these traditional things, making things from scratch. And there was a beauty to it. There was a calm, meditative nature to it. And I think that there's this feeling we've had so much dystopian, so much, gritty content, books and movies and TV shows and whatever, that people kind of want something that's less gritty, less depressing. And I look at like a show like Ted Lasso, which is by no means perfect. I recognize its flaws. It has plenty, but there's a certain kind of goodness in it, that even root for the bad guys in it. You know what I mean? But there's a certain, like, just a good feeling in it. People are good to each other in it. And there's something about that. I really like that quote, about imagination is of value. Fairy stories are rooted in truth. Happy endings do in fact occur, and the blue spring mist makes an ugly street look beautiful. And it's just as real as the street itself.
Right. There really is this novel was very much a celebration of beauty and of love and of goodness. Like, even the characters who didn't completely turn around had moments where they encountered something that was beautiful, that was beyond them, that was pulling them towards a change. And I really liked, there were several moments for several different characters where they felt like they had reached a decision point in their life where they had to make a choice, and they thought that they had made a choice. And then sometime not in the very terribly later, they realized that they thought that they had made a choice, but they're being asked to choose again. And I don't know if I've ever seen anyone do that, where a character makes a choice that they seem to have like changed their life, and then they're given an opportunity to reconsider. Like, are you sure you really want to make that choice? Is that really the choice you want to make? Try again. The second chance is not a theme that I've seen explored in literature as much as this novel did. That idea that grace doesn't just knock once and only once, that sometimes grace comes again.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, that was one of the things I really loved about it is, hey, maybe you thought that was an irrevocable choice, but maybe it's really not.
Right. So, there's so her Wikipedia page, talks about her own attitude toward her own novels. She said there were only 3 of her books that she loved: Valley of Song, The Dean's Watch, and The Child from the Sea, her final novel. And she said she doubted whether The Child from the Sea was a good book. Nevertheless, I love it because its theme is forgiveness, the grace that seems to me divine above all others, and the most desperate need of all of us, tormented and tormenting human beings, and also because I seem to give to it all I have to give. So, I know I can never write another novel, for I do not think there is anything else to say.
Wow.
That's a pretty traumatic statement.
Maybe I'll save that one for my last one of hers to read, because one of the things I hate is when I read an author's best book first, because that's usually the most famous one.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I really loved this, and I go and search out everything else they've written, and everything else they've written is sort of second tier.
Right.
One other thing I wanted to say about The Scent of Water is it really deals with mental illness in a way that I loved. The elderly cousin who left her the house leaves behind diaries that the protagonist reads, and this cousin had dealt with mental illness all of her life, and there's a beautiful moment where she sort of realizes that she's been given a choice to say yes to it, to not fight it, but this is your cross. It's not explicitly said this is your cross, but she's really given a moment of clarity where she realizes that she can either continue to fight it tooth and nail, or she can accept it and find grace within it, and that she's been asked to say yes to it, and she does. And I'm not sure that I've ever seen anything quite like that. Like, she's never given a clinical diagnosis. You're not exactly sure what the nature of her ailment is, but it's certain. But what you see is her struggles with it and how it affects not only her, but the people around her, and the choices that they're given to make to either accept her or to reject her in her brokenness, and it feels like it's both very much about mental illness, but it's also sort of about the graces that we give to ourselves and to each other, and about how God can work through even these things which seem tragic in our lives.
Cool.
Anyway, I can go on and on.
Yeah. So that's what we've been reading. Let's talk about what we saw at Mass this week. For us, it was the seventh Sunday of Easter. And although we didn't get much about the readings themselves, because it was also First Communion Sunday for our parish. So before I get talking about the First Communion itself, our church has a problem in the sound system.
Oh, really bad sound system.
It started last week. Did you notice that when Father Leo was saying Mass?
It's been getting worse and worse over time. I mean, it didn't just start, but it sort of hit a critical point, I think.
What happens is every once in a while, there's a loud crackle, like a pop crackle. And I timed it. It is exactly every 49 seconds. That's too regular for it to be many different things. And it knocks the voices down, they're not being amplified, and then they come back up again. The voices fade in of whoever's talking. My guess is there's a fault in some electronics, and it's resetting every 49 seconds. That's my guess. Hopefully they get a guy in there to fix it this week, because he turned it off after the prayers of the faithful. He announced before Mass that he would turn it off after the prayers of the faithful and just use his own projection of voice. And as I've mentioned before, Father Matt is a former Marine officer, infantry officer, and current Marine chaplain. he was a Marine before he was ordained, so he can project his voice.
Yes,
is good. So it was First Communion, and one thing I noticed, by the way, is we didn't get the song at the end. You know how we used to get the kids all singing? They didn't do that this year. I think that's Father's influence. It's one of those like, oh, isn't it sweet? Let's pay attention to the kids' moments, but it's not really adding much to the Mass. If I can be honest, it's just, for the families of the kids involved, I'm sure it's wonderful, but for everyone else, we're just enduring this usually very long song that they're singing. But Father Matt had his homily that he gave, and a couple high points. He asked the kids about what are the most important days of your life that you've had so far. And they named birthday, so the day they were born, and then their baptism day. And he pointed out that you don't remember those, probably. Like, you certainly don't remember the day you were born. You probably don't remember your baptism unless you were baptized older. But I think he knew that none of the kids had been baptized older. They'd all been baptized as babies. And he says, but today, First Communion is the first important one you will remember. That's the first important day you will remember, or you should remember.
Because he pointed out that he did not really remember very much about his own First Communion day. All he remembered was getting in trouble for talking.
I don't really remember much about my First Communion. I remember, I have a memory of the photo of me in my suit. I'm sure I was in a giant crowd of kids in St. John the Evangelist Church in Canton, Mass.
I remember a lot about my First Communion because I opted not to be part of the crowd of kids. I was at Catholic school, and they had a First Communion Mass for all the school kids together, and I opted to sit it out. And I don't even know how this went down.
Sit it out, but go to...
I made my First Communion on a separate Sunday when I was the only kid making the First Communion.
Right. So, because it could have sounded like you were saying you decided not to receive your First Communion. I just want to be clear.
I do not remember the decision-making process and who got the ball rolling on that, whether it was my specific request or something, but I had a script in my head of how I wanted it to be. And so my parents and I brought up the gifts, and I wore a dress that was mostly white, but it had like little yellow flowers with green leaves on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not the traditional white First Communion dress. And I specifically remember not really wanting the traditional white First Communion dress. I was a very
hippie child.
I wouldn't say hippie. I had my own ideas of how I wanted things done, and I was definitely a kid who walked to my own beat, my own drummer, and I did not feel a need to fit in. I think I really wanted my First Communion to be something that was mine and not to be part of a crowd, which is very typical of me.
So not so much a bridezilla, it is more of like communicatezilla.
I just remember it being a really special day, and I remember just being happy.
Yeah.
And not having to endure. Like, I think part of it was that at that time, all of the school kids who were making the First Communion sat together in a large group, and they weren't with their families. And I wanted to be with my family. Like the way our parish does it, each of the First Communicants gets a pew of their own with them and their family.
That's because there's 7 of them as opposed to 40 or 50.
There was 4. I would say there was more like
there's a handful of them as opposed
like
to 40 or 50 or 60.
Right.
There would have been.
Right. So that's part of it. But it was a really beautiful day. I loved it.
So he did encourage them to remember this day and remember receiving Jesus. He made a point to talk about food. Our bodies turn food into us. That's how food works. But the Eucharist turns us into Jesus's own divinity.
He did a really good job of first asking questions that got their attention. He said, I talked to your parents before Mass, and they said that your favorite foods are broccoli and Brussels sprouts and green beans. And he listed all the green vegetables. And you don't really like pizza and hamburgers and hot dogs and ice cream and cake, right? And of course, the kids are all like, no. So I think that Father Matt does a really good job of using humor to sort of get your attention focused. He's very good at knowing, like,
not overdoing it either.
You have to keep things short and simple and make a few points, because otherwise you're going to lose them. And he did a good job of not losing anyone.
Yeah, that is true. And then he started asking them, so what do you drive? What's your car? You have a car, right? And like each of the First Communicants, like, so you got a car, like you don't. Like, no, you don't have a car. Like, you don't own a car yourself. Do you have a motorcycle? What do you have? How'd you get here today? And so went around asking the kids, how did you get here today? And he was making the point that parents These children now have a right to receive the Eucharist. They have a right to be here at Mass every Sunday, and it is up to you to bring them.
But first, before he did that, he got everyone's attention again using a Star Wars reference.
That was after, actually.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it was before, because he was talking about how this is the beginning of a journey, and you're not going to be able to begin the journey.
I thought he ended with that, but okay. But he asked, the great theologian Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Luke, you've taken the first step into a larger world.
Right. And so, telling the parents, like, this is the first step, but they're not going to be able to take the next steps on their own, without help. They can't drive to church.
Right.
So don't deprive them of the journey.
And he emphasized, like, you enrich our community. Like, it's not just I need bodies in the pew. I need to fill the pew or I'm not doing my job, or we need more donations or whatever. He was really making the point, like, your presence enriches the community, makes it better, adds to our worship of God, and will hopefully enrich you, as well. So I think it was a really good homily to make some important points that need to be made, but also to kind of do it with gentleness, which is, I think, an important aspect. So good job, Father Matt. It was good. So, and that's it. That's it for this week, I think. We should wrap it up there. We'll take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Raising the Bets, including Walter G., Daniel W., Philip W., and Rose P. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Raising the Bets and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And that's it for this time. Find links from our discussion in our show notes at sqpn.com/bets. That's BETTS. Send your feedback at the StarQuest Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Send us an email at bets@sqpn.com or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. Write a review at Apple Podcasts and share the podcast with your friends to help us grow our community and reach more listeners. Until next time, I'm Dom Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
Thank you for listening to Raising the Bets on StarQuest. Here's another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy, The Catholics of Oz. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Oz.